Hello philosophers, my name is Dr. Gilmore and this is my porch. Now there actually are philosophers from the ancient world known as the porch philosophers. The Greek word for porch is stoa, so they became the Stoics. But here in this class we're going to be, I suppose, online philosophers. I'm calling you that because a philosopher is not someone with special abilities or certain experiences, educationally or otherwise, but rather someone with a certain kind of desire, namely the desire to understand things, and a desire to understand things that is so strong that you're willing to work at it. During these 10 days that you're in this class, you are philosophers, and I will call you such. One of the ways that we're going to approach philosophy is to dig into some of the earliest written philosophy that we have. Now, we can speculate about when people started asking, what kind of being am I? What kind of world do we live in? These sorts of things. But what we can say with some confidence is that some of the first written philosophy we have comes from 6th, 5th, and 4th century Athens. Not the one here in Georgia, but the one over in Europe. And so one of the characters we're going to read together is Plato. All right. Plato is not only a very good thinker and not only someone who will challenge you to pose new questions, but he's also just a good writer. He writes dialogues, which means that he doesn't advance what his main point is and then give you proofs for why that main point is true, but instead what Plato is going to do is he's going to create characters. So in the first one we're going to read together, called the Euthyphro, he's going to show you a character, a priest named Euthyphro, and another character named Socrates. Now Socrates historically was Plato's mentor, his teacher, and in these dialogues he uses his teacher as sort of the voice of wisdom in most of them. Now we're going to see some variations on that as we roll along, but we'll get to those when we get to them. Main thing to think about is when you are reading the Euthyphro, when you're reading the Crito and the Apology, when you're reading the Republic, don't necessarily look for one line that is the essay, that is the text's main point, but rather look for the ways that ideas get bounced back and forth between the characters. What that's supposed to do in written form is to simulate what happens when we have a philosophical conversation. All right. Now, Plato had a number of star students, and one of them, the one whose writings come down to us in the most complete form, is Aristotle. Now, both of these books, hopefully you should already have in your possession. If you don't, order them as soon as humanly possible. And, in the meantime, you can use online translations. They're not going to be nearly as easy to read as these. The reason you're paying a few bucks for these, and it's not really an expensive book compared to a lot of books, is because these modern translations are easier to read. But Aristotle, he does write in the way that we think of as essay form. In other words, he has a main idea, he gives you reasons for it, he counters objections to it, things like that. He's a lot tougher to read, and for that reason, you're not going to be reading him on your own until we get into deep into the second week of class, which is to say well past the midterm exam. All right. Up until that point, what I'm going to be doing is a series of videos called Aristotle Explainers. I'll be here on the porch, and I will be reading sections of Aristotle out loud and commenting on them as I go. Now, you are going to want to have your book open while I am doing so, because I'm going to be pausing, I'm going to be pointing out things. I'm basically going to be attempting to teach via video the habits of reading that will help you read a difficult text like Aristotle. To measure how well you have engaged with these, we got a couple different exercises that you're going to be doing either every day of the class or most days of the class. Now, for the Plato readings, and also for the last couple Aristotle readings, you're going to have pretty standard online class discussion boards, which is to say you're going to respond to whatever it is that I assign to you. Then you're going to reply to a classmate's post. Now, when I say reply, I don't mean that you get on there and do the Southern thing and say, that's a really good point, I'm glad you said that, you're such a nice person, and I can tell, even though we're separated by, distance and pandemic, that you probably smell nice too. That's not what I'm after. What I'm after is follow-up questions. I've got a handout that I'm going to transmit to you, and actually it's already on the Canvas page. I'm also going to put it on each discussion page, called The Art of the Follow-Up Question. What I want you to do after someone else responds to the Plato reading, or late in the semester the Aristotle reading, is I want you to use that handout and write 100 words or so worth of follow-up questions for them. Look at what their main points are, look at the kinds of things that they are asserting, look at the things that they are assuming, and write follow-up questions. Why do you say this? What kind of a thing is this? When you use this term, what do you mean by it? Have you considered this implication? So on and so forth. You'll find all of that on the Art of the Follow-Up handout, alright? Then you're going to respond to your classmates' follow-up questions. This is why you need to write follow-up questions, because you're going to have to reply with 100 words. If someone just said good post, you can say thank you, but then you're 98 words short. If you got follow-up questions, you can really dig into it. I should back up here and say, when you're responding to the readings, be sure that you cite the text at least twice. You can cite it by page number, or you can cite it by Stephanus number, and I'll talk about what Stephanus numbers here are, what Stephanus numbers are here in a little bit. Thank you. So that's one of your assignments. For Aristotle, when we read him together, what I'm going to send you on are called Aristotle scavenger hunts. The instructions for this are going to be on the discussion thread for each scavenger hunt. What Aristotle is teaching us, at least for the first several readings, is logic. So in other words, when we use words, when we use phrases, when we use sentences, what kind of work are those words, phrases, and sentences doing? The reason I send you on these scavenger hunts is so that you can show me, one, what you've internalized and learned well, and two, what you still need to internalize and learn a little bit better. And so, for these scavenger hunts, I'm going to ask you to use those cameras that you have. Now, I've learned my lesson in the spring semester when we were under quarantine, not to require a whole bunch of long video, because not everyone's internet is the same. I am going to ask you to snap a picture and upload it to the discussion board. And for instance, here's what one of the early ones is going to do. You'll hear more about it when we get to that. It's going to ask you to find two things that are of the same genus but are of different species. Now, we know what that means basically in biology. Aristotle is going to show us that that structure, the general and the specific, helps us to think clearly about living things, to be sure, but also a whole lot of other things in our world, right? So once you've brought that, you're going to snap a picture of it, you're going to upload it, you're going to give me usually 3 or 4 sentences of explanation. Then I'm going to respond to your explanation, ask you some follow-up questions of my own, you're going to reply to that, and then you're done with that. So it's a couple discussion boards each day. Remember, in a non-quarantine scenario, this class would be meeting 4 hours every morning from 8:30 to 12:30. I guess that ends after morning, but you know what I'm talking about. And so we are simulating that level of work. Now, you can do it any time of the day that you need to. If you have to be at work, if you've got family responsibilities, any of those sorts of things, you can fit these tasks around those things. And because we are operating under quarantine, and I understand that, if you have kids, your kids are probably home with you. If you have siblings who are still in school, they're probably home with you. You might work better at 7 at night than you do at 10 in the morning. That's fine. Just be sure to get it done day by day. All right. Now, the third book that we're using is called Just the Arguments. All right. Now, Just the Arguments is going to be a third set of discussion posts, and I know it's a lot of discussion posts, but what I've discovered is if I ask people to do, again, video uploads, it tends to blow up. So I apologize if you don't much like video discussion posts, but that's kind of where we are. All right. Just the Arguments is a collection of 100 arguments from the history of philosophy. It tends to focus on recent philosophy, which is why I use it alongside Plato and Aristotle, which are very ancient thinkers, so we can get a good broad range of inquiries here. What each one of these is going to be is a brief, and by brief I mean sometimes 2 pages, sometimes as many as 5, very seldom longer than 5 pages, summaries of what's going on in one of the famous arguments in usually recent philosophy. What you're going to be doing for each of these, is participating in a conversation about them. For the first 4, which is to say before the midterm exam, I'm going to be making a brief video that you can watch, talking my way through one of these, showing you what the implications are, things like that. And then I'm going to write up a series of 5 discussion questions. You're going to pick 1 or 2 of those discussion questions. You're going to reply to them. And as you do so, you're going to show me how you're interacting with it. Okay? Then, after the midterm exam, which is to say, next Tuesday, each of you is going to do a brief, and by brief I mean 3 to 5 minute introduction of one of these as a video. This is the one video that I'm going to require for this class. And then you are going to write up 3 to 5 discussion questions, and then your classmates are going to pick 1 or 2 of them and respond to them. Okay? Now, reasons that I'm requiring this particular video. 1, philosophy is something that happens with our bodies. All right? We use our mouths and our lungs to make questions verbally. Our eyes often tell us whether we're confused, whether we are excited by something. Our hands often gesture to let us know what's going on. And that video is going to let me and your classmates see how you are engaging with these thoughts as a body as well as a mind. Okay? The second reason is that if I can, see you working through this, I can take a fairly good guess at the parts that are most confusing, and that way when I comment, I can try to engage with the parts that are giving you the most trouble. All right? So that's the one video you got to do, but for each of those, you'll have to do a discussion post as well. Okay? Now, I did mention a midterm exam. I did mention a final exam. The midterm is on day 5. The final is on day 10. Each of these is worth 1/10 of your grade, or 10% of your grade, or 100 points out of 1,000, depending on what kind of math you prefer. They're both open book, because I'm not going to be in your houses making sure that you don't open your books. So I'm going to write the exam questions so that they are essays, and so that, you will benefit from having your book, but if you're reading it for the first time for the exam, you'll regret doing that. Okay? Each one, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to write up 6 exam questions. I'm going to feed them into the computer, into Canvas, and then Canvas is going to choose 2 of them at random for you to answer. So each of the exams is going to be about a 2-hour endeavor. Because those 2 hours are real hours of real time, and I understand that in these conditions, time is of a premium, I'm not going to be assigning any homework reading for those days. Instead, you're going to use the time that you would be using to read to take the exam. Okay? And I've got my notebook here, see what else I am forgetting here. I think that is about the size of it. So, it's going to be a fair bit of work. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But as I said, what's great about philosophy as a field of study is that when you are learning logic with Aristotle, you are learning structures of thought that will help you in not only, your professional life, whatever that professional life looks like, but also your life in communities, political communities, church communities, neighborly communities, so on and so forth. When you're engaging with, the big questions with Plato, and those questions are going to be, what does it mean to be holy? What does it mean to be just? What does it mean to desire something? Again, those are big human questions. They're going to be with you the rest of your life, so I want you to be thinking about them carefully now. Okay? Like I said, this is a subject that, always excites me to teach. This is, not only exciting, but also a little bit nerve-wracking because it's the first time that I'll be teaching it online. But I'm looking forward to the challenge, and I hope you are as well. I am Nathan Gilmour. My email address is ngilmour, that's Gilmour. Be sure to spell it right, or else it won't get to my email box, at ec.edu. Ngilmour at ec.edu. Email me with whatever questions you've got. And look for more emails from me as we roll along. All right? I'm Dr. Gilmour. Thank you, philosophers. You can move on to the next part of the class.